I had been working on a pump near the guest barn for most of the morning. It was early summer, warm enough to make my shirt stick between my shoulders, but not so hot that the cattle were crowding the shade yet. The main house was full of people talking about a regional farm cooperative. Buyers, neighboring farmers, an accountant, the livestock vet, and a few of our senior workers had been coming and going since breakfast. I was not part of any of that. My job was to get the pump working before one of the lower troughs ran dry. The battery on my drill gave up halfway through removing a rusted bracket. I knew there was a charger and a long extension cord in the cabinet on the covered terrace, so I walked around the house without thinking much about it. Then I stepped past the corner and stopped. Victoria was sitting alone in a shaded chair, looking out toward the orchard. I had seen her nearly every day for 2 years. Usually she wore fitted jeans, a clean work shirt, leather boots, and her hair tied back. Even when she came straight from the office, she looked ready to inspect a fence or climb into a truck. That afternoon she wore a light summer dress and low leather sandals. Her hair was down. A thin cardigan rested beside her, along with a folder full of farm papers. She had simple earrings on, and one hand was wrapped around a glass of iced tea. She did not look like someone who had stepped away for long. She looked like someone borrowing 10 quiet minutes before everyone needed her again. I stood there longer than I should have. She turned her head and saw me. "Did you need something, Nick? Or are you planning to stand there all afternoon?" Her voice was calm, not annoyed. That almost made it worse. "I need the extension cord," I said. "Battery is about done." She glanced toward the cabinet behind her. Then she looked back at me, and I could tell she had noticed exactly where my attention had been. "Enjoying the view?" I looked toward the orchard, even though we both knew she had not only meant the trees. There were several safe answers available to me. "Nice orchard. Good weather. Just checking the slope." "Instead," I said, more than I probably should. The words came out before I could stop them. For 1 second, neither of us moved. I was already thinking about my truck, the cash hidden under the spare tire, the list of other farms folded inside the glove box. I had learned a long time ago not to believe any job was permanent. The manufacturing plant where I used to work had closed with almost no warning. After that, I kept my belongings packed and tried not to need anything I could not carry. Now I had just told the owner of Willow Creek Farm that I liked looking at her. Victoria studied me. She did not smile right away, but something changed around her eyes. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. "The cord is in the lower cabinet," she said. That was all. I opened the cabinet, found the cord, and left without dropping anything or walking into a post, which felt like an accomplishment. For the rest of the afternoon, I replayed the exchange while repairing the pump. Every version ended with me deciding I had been careless. Victoria controlled my wages, my work schedule, and the cottage I rented on the property. Even if she had taken the comment well, that did not mean I had any business making it. That evening, I almost walked to the main house to apologize. I stopped at the end of my cottage steps. A formal apology would force her to respond. It would turn 10 seconds on a terrace into a workplace discussion. So I stayed where I was, ate a sandwich over the sink, and told myself to act normal in the morning. At the crew meeting, Victoria stood beside the equipment board with her hair tied back and her usual work clothes on. She went through the day's assignments without looking at me any more than necessary. I decided that was good. Then, near the end, she asked, "The guest barn pump?" "Fixed. The bracket was bent, and one connection had worked loose." "Will it hold?" "Yes. I tested it twice." She looked at me for half a second longer than usual. "Good." After the meeting, everyone started toward the trucks. I was putting my gloves on when she called my name. I turned, expecting the terrace conversation to catch up with me. Instead, she held out a clipboard. "The cooperative group wants an equipment inspection this afternoon. The accountant has replacement values, but he does not know which machines are actually reliable." I looked at the list. 2 tractors, the orchard sprayer, both hay wagons, the older loader, and several smaller machines. "You want me there? You work on them more than anyone else." I looked across the yard. A few senior workers were still close enough to hear us. "I'm not a manager. I know what your job is, Nick." She said it without heat. Then she removed one glove, something she always did before a conversation she considered important. "I'm asking whether the estimates match the condition of the equipment. That is all." "All right." She nodded once and walked toward the office. The inspection started after lunch. Victoria, the accountant, one neighboring farmer, and I moved through the equipment barn while I explained which repairs were temporary and which machines still had years left in them. The accountant wanted to replace the older loader. "It looks bad," he said. "It looks bad because nobody has painted it in 15 years, I answered. "Hydraulics are steady. Transmission is good. The seat is held together with tape, but the machine is fine." Victoria looked at the accountant. "We keep it." Later, he showed us a repair estimate for one of the tractors. "That number is too low," I said. He frowned. "The shop gave it to us. They gave you the number for the visible work. Once they open the rear housing, they will find more." "How can you know that?" "Because I can hear it." The neighboring farmer laughed, but Victoria did not. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "Do not commit until they give you a full inspection." She wrote that down. By the time we finished, the others had stopped treating me like a worker who happened to be standing nearby. Victoria asked questions. I answered them. When I did not know something, I said so. As we left the barn, she walked beside me. "You were right about the loader," she said. "You already knew that. I wanted to hear whether you would say it in front of people who disagreed." I looked at her. And you did." Then she kept walking, leaving me with the clipboard and the uncomfortable feeling that the moment on the terrace had not pushed me away from her world. It had brought me closer. After the equipment inspection, Victoria started asking for my opinion more often. At first, it was always in front of someone else. She would stop me near the barn and ask whether a gate could make it through another season. She would bring me into the equipment shed while the accountant was there and ask which repairs could wait. Once, during a meeting about orchard work, she asked whether the old utility truck could handle another year of hauling produce. "It can," I said, "but only if nobody expects the passenger door to open from the inside." One of the senior workers laughed. Victoria looked at me over the top of her notes. "That sounds like a safety issue." "It is only a safety issue for the passenger." She almost smiled. A week later, she sent me to an agricultural supply store 2 towns over to pick up fencing parts and a replacement pump motor. When I reached the truck, she was standing beside it with a folder tucked under her arm. "I'm coming with you," she said. I looked toward the office. "For fencing parts?" "For the motor. I want to speak with the supplier before he changes the price again." I opened the passenger door from the outside. Victoria looked at the handle, then at me. "I see what you meant." The drive took almost an hour. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about the cooperative. She explained that joining could lower transportation costs and give Willow Creek better access to large grocery contracts. It could also give a central board control over purchasing, distribution, staffing, and some decisions about how the land was used. "That sounds like a lot to hand over," I said. "It is." "Then why consider it?" "Because fuel costs do not care how independent I feel." She said it calmly, but her fingers tightened around the folder. At the store, the supplier tried to sell her a more expensive motor than the one we needed. Victoria asked 3 questions, waited through his long explanation, then looked at me. "Will it improve anything?" "No." The supplier cleared his throat. "It has a longer service rating." "For a system that does not run long enough to need it," I said. Victoria closed the folder. "We'll take the original motor." On the way back, we stopped at a roadside place and ate sandwiches on the tailgate. Victoria drank iced tea without sugar. I already knew that, though I could not remember when I had first noticed. She caught me looking at the bottle. "What? Nothing. You are not very convincing when you say that. I was thinking you always order the same drink." She leaned one shoulder against the truck. "You pay a strange amount of attention for someone who tries so hard not to be noticed." That landed closer than she probably knew. I looked down at the gravel. Being noticed has not always worked out well for me. She waited. Most people filled silence when they wanted an answer. Victoria did not. She just stood there until I decided whether to continue. I told her about the plant where I used to work, how it closed with almost no warning, how I lost my income and my rented place within the same month. I did not give her every detail, but I told her enough. "So now you stay ready to leave?" she said. "I stay ready for things to change." That is not quite the same thing. It feels the same when you are packing. She did not argue. A few days later, a regional buyer canceled a large apple order. I heard about it because Victoria took the call in the farm office while I was outside repairing a shelf for the roadside stand. Her voice stayed even through the whole conversation. She asked about the contract, the deadline, and the buyer's reason. She thanked him before ending the call. Then the office went quiet. I carried the repaired shelf inside, and found her sitting behind the desk with the contract open in front of her. "I can come back," I said. "No, leave it by the wall." I set the shelf down. She was staring at the same page without reading it. "Bad call. 40% of the early Apple order is gone." I did not know enough about the numbers to understand the full damage, but I knew it was not small. Victoria leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she said, "I'm tired of everyone looking at me like I already know what to do." It was the first time I had heard her admit uncertainty. I could have told her she would figure it out. That was what people usually said when they had nothing useful to offer. Instead, I said, "You don't have to know immediately. You just have to make the next decision before the wrong person makes it for you." Her eyes opened. For a few seconds, she did not look like my employer. She looked like someone who had been carrying too much and had forgotten other people could see the weight. "That sounds like experience," she said. "It sounds like a man who once let other people make decisions while he waited for things to improve." She folded the contract. "The roadside stand needs those shelves tomorrow. I'll finish them tonight." "You do not have to." "I know." That became the pattern between us. Nothing happened that anyone could point to. No private dinners. No secret meetings. No reason for gossip, at least not yet. We shared coffee before the crew arrived. We checked a weak calf together near the horse barn. We sorted invoices at the kitchen table because the office printer stopped working. We drove to inspect a damaged fence and ended up talking about which workers could be trusted to handle an emergency without making it worse. Sometimes I forgot she owned the place. Then she would approve a purchase, change a schedule, or sign a check with my name on it, and I remembered immediately. One evening, we were driving back from the far orchard after checking irrigation lines. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, and the cab was quiet. Victoria looked out the window and said, "You have not apologized." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "For what?" "The terrace." I kept my eyes on the road. I thought apologizing might make it worse. Was it untrue? No. She turned toward me slightly. I could feel it without looking. "Then an apology would have been dishonest," she said. I let out a slow breath. "That does not mean it was appropriate." "No," she said. "It does not." The truck rolled over a rough patch, and the tools behind the seat shifted. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive. When we reached the equipment barn, she opened the passenger door, then paused before getting out. "This cannot become careless, Nick." "I know. I mean it." "So do I." She stepped down and closed the door. I watched her walk toward the office, telling myself that the warning should have made things easier. It did the opposite, because now I knew she had been thinking about that moment too. Charles arrived on a Monday morning in a clean dark truck that looked like it had never carried feed, tools, or anything that could scratch the paint. I knew who he was before anyone introduced us. Most people around Staunton had heard of him. He owned several farms, a packing business, and enough trucks to move produce across half the state. He was also one of the main people behind the cooperative Victoria had been considering. What I did not know was how well he knew her. He walked into the farm office without knocking. I was at the side desk going over maintenance records when he came in and said, "Morning, Vicky," like he had been expected. Victoria looked up slowly. Nobody else called her that. "Charles," she said. There was no warmth in her voice, but there was history. He set a leather folder on her desk and glanced at me. "You must be the young man who knows every loose bolt on the property." "I know some of them." He smiled in a way that made the words feel smaller than they were. "Good. Every farm needs someone temporary who knows where things are." Victoria removed her gloves. "Nick is part of the permanent crew." Charles did not look embarrassed. "Of course." He opened the folder and started talking about transportation contracts, storage costs, and access to newer equipment. His numbers sounded polished. Every page had charts, estimates, and neat columns showing how much Willow Creek could save. Then he started saying we can move the orchard volume through my facility. We can reduce labor overlap. We can decide which fields make sense long-term. Victoria stopped him. "You mean the board?" Charles smiled. "Naturally." He stayed most of the day. By lunch, I had seen enough to understand that he did not act like a normal business visitor. He knew which cabinet held the old property maps. He knew Victoria's father had hated debt. He knew the dates of improvements made before I had ever heard of Willow Creek. He also knew how to talk over her without making it obvious. When Victoria said she wanted to keep the roadside stand, Charles called it sentimental. When she questioned the labor plan, he called her cautious. When she asked why the cooperative needed authority over staffing, he said she was thinking too personally. Each answer sounded reasonable until I noticed none of them actually answered her. That afternoon, Victoria asked me to join an inspection of the older pasture. Charles came too. We drove separately. I rode with Victoria in the farm truck, while Charles followed behind us. "He calls you Vicky," I said. She kept her eyes on the road. "He has known me a long time." "How long?" Her hands tightened on the wheel. "That question has nothing to do with the pasture." "I know." "Then do not ask it while you are working for me." The words were controlled, but the distance in them hit harder than anger would have. She was right. That did not make it easier to hear. At the pasture, Charles talked about selling the land. He said it was underused and would bring in enough money to replace 2 tractors and improve the packing shed. Victoria stood by the gate with her arms crossed. "My father bought this pasture from his brother, and now it costs more than it earns. It feeds cattle. It could feed the rest of the business." Then Charles looked at me. "What do you think?" It was a trap dressed up like a question. "The south section drains well," I said. "The cattle use it more than it looks from the road." Charles nodded. Loyal answer. Accurate answer. Victoria looked at me, then back at him. "The pasture is not for sale." After that, things changed. Not all at once, but enough for me to notice. Victoria stopped asking me to join supply runs. Equipment discussions started, including another supervisor. When she needed repair records, she had them left at the office instead of asking me to bring them inside. The office door stayed open whenever I was there. At lunch, she sat with the accountant or the senior workers. Our early coffee stopped. I told myself it was better. It was exactly what we had agreed without saying. No carelessness. No crossed lines. No reason for anyone to think I had special access. Still, it felt like losing something I had never been allowed to call mine. Charles kept returning. He treated the cooperative like it was already approved. He recommended cutting permanent labor and using seasonal crews. He wanted equipment maintenance outsourced. He said the roadside stand should close because it distracted from larger contracts. He suggested centralizing all transport through his company. Every new plan seemed to make my job less necessary. One evening, I went to the office to leave repair logs. The front room was empty, but voices came from the smaller room behind it. Charles was speaking. "You need to remove him before the vote." I stopped near the desk. Victoria answered quietly. "His employment is not part of this agreement. It becomes part of it when everyone sees you asking for his opinion. He understands the condition of the equipment. He is an inexperienced worker with unusual access. He is dependable. That is not the point." There was a pause. Then Charles said, "People notice favoritism. They notice a young man positioning himself near a woman with land. You may trust him. The board will ask why." My face went hot. Victoria's voice hardened. "Do not confuse my private life with farm management." Charles answered, "Everyone else will do exactly that." I left before hearing more. The next morning, I waited until Victoria finished the crew meeting, then followed her toward the equipment barn. "We need to talk." She looked at me and knew immediately. "What did you hear?" "Enough to know my job is part of the negotiation." She glanced toward the yard. "Not here." We went into the empty feed room. She closed the door, then opened it again and left it halfway. Even then, she was thinking about how it looked. "Charles and I were engaged," she said. I stared at her. "It was years ago. We planned to combine the farms. At first, he called it partnership. Then he started making decisions without me. He spoke for me in meetings. He negotiated with my land as if it already belonged to him. And now he is back doing the same thing." "Yes. Why did you not tell me?" "Because you work for me. That has not stopped any of this from affecting me." She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from a long day. The kind that came from fighting the same fight twice. "He noticed how I feel about you," she said. The room went still. I could hear cattle shifting beyond the wall. Victoria looked directly at me. "I think about you more than an employer should think about one of her workers." I took one step closer. "So do I." She raised a hand. "Do not." I stopped. "You receive wages from me. You live in a cottage I control. My name affects where you can work next. I will not begin anything while refusing me could cost you your home and income." "I would not refuse you." "That is exactly why I cannot trust the situation." The answer hurt because it was fair. I looked away. "You decided what I could handle before giving me the truth." She nodded once. "Yes." I wanted to tell her I was willing to take the risk. Instead, I saw the cottage, the truck, my packed boxes, and the hidden cash under the spare tire. Everything I had spent years preparing to lose. I need time, I said. Victoria's expression closed. I understand. But the way she said it told me she thought I was already leaving. 3 days later, Charles fired me. He did it in the office with another administrator sitting beside him and a stack of papers already prepared. Victoria was not there. Charles said the cooperative transition required a smaller permanent crew. He said equipment work would be outsourced and seasonal labor would cover the rest. My position, according to him, no longer fit the new structure. The agreement has not been signed, I said. There are temporary management provisions. Approved by who? He slid a paper across the desk. The language was vague enough that I could not tell whether it meant anything. My final pay was listed at the bottom. So was the date I had to leave the cottage. Charles placed a generic recommendation letter on top. You are capable, he said. You should find something quickly. I looked at him for a few seconds. He expected anger. Maybe an argument he could later describe as proof that I was a problem. I picked up the papers instead. When does Victoria return? This decision does not require her personal involvement. That answered enough. I packed that afternoon. It took less than an hour. Clothes went into 2 bags. Tools went behind the truck seat. A coffee maker, 3 plates, and a box of documents filled the rest of the space. I stood in the middle of the cottage and looked around. For years, I had believed keeping my life small would protect me. No heavy furniture. No expensive things. Nothing that would take more than one trip. I had prepared perfectly. It still felt like losing everything. My phone rang after dark. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, but I let it stop. A message came a few minutes later. Charles had acted without her approval. She had rejected the cooperative agreement. He had no authority at Willow Creek. Her attorney was reviewing the dismissal. She would pay everything I was owed. Then came the part 1 read several times. She would not ask me to return under the old arrangement. She explained that Charles had started treating the farm, the workers, and her personal choices like things he could control. My dismissal showed her that she had allowed the same pattern back through a different door. She was choosing independence, even if the next few years became harder. I wanted to call her. I wanted to ask why she had left me outside the truth until there was almost nothing left to save. Instead, I put the phone down and drove away the next morning. I found work at a farm equipment repair shop outside a nearby town. The pay was steady. The owner rented no housing to employees and asked no questions about my private life. I spent my days learning engines, hydraulic systems, electrical faults, and the difference between a cheap repair and one that would last. For the first time in years, my job gave me somewhere to move toward instead of only somewhere to stand until it ended. Several weeks passed. Customers from around the county brought news about Willow Creek. Victoria had reopened the roadside store. She was selling apples directly to restaurants and organizing weekly produce boxes. 2 neighboring farms were sharing transport with her without forming a central board. The old packing shed was being repaired instead of handed over to Charles's company. The plan was smaller than the cooperative. It also belonged to her. One Saturday afternoon, I drove to Willow Creek. I told myself I was only going to see the store. That was a lie. Victoria was behind the counter arranging jars on a shelf. She wore dark jeans, a fitted work shirt, clean leather boots, and small earrings. There were invoices spread across the counter and a pencil tucked behind one ear. She looked tired. She also looked more like herself than she had during the cooperative meetings. When she saw me, her hand stopped halfway toward the shelf. Nick. Hi. She set the jar down carefully. Did you come to discuss returning? No. Her expression changed, though I could not tell whether it was relief or disappointment. I have work, I said. I'm staying at the repair shop. They're training me, and I may start taking mobile jobs later. That sounds good. It is. We stood with the counter between us. I could hear a cooler running near the back wall. Outside, a truck passed on the road and kept going. I did not come for wages, I said. I do not want land. I'm not asking for a title, housing, or help fixing what happened. Victoria looked down at the invoices. Then why are you here? Because I left without saying what mattered. She lifted her eyes. My answer on the terrace was true. Every time I tried to be careful after that, I became less honest. Careful was necessary. Some of it was. I stepped closer to the counter. But I built my whole life around being ready to leave. I thought that meant nobody could take stability from me again. All it really meant was that I never chose anything strongly enough to stay for it. Victoria folded her hands. I am older than you. I know. I have more money, more experience, and a longer history in this community. People will talk. I know that too. You need a life that does not depend on mine. I agree. She studied my face as if she expected me to argue with the conditions. I did not. I'm not asking you to become less established, I said. I don't need to stand where you stand. I need to know whether there is room beside you. Her eyes softened, but she stayed still. I will not date another employee in secret. I'm not your employee. I will not become your shortcut to security. I already have work. And what happens when the repair shop sends you here? I write an invoice like I would for any other farm. That finally brought a small smile. You have considered this. I had several weeks. She looked toward the front windows, then back at me. I tried to convince myself it was temporary. The cooperative? You. I did not move. She came around the counter slowly and stopped a few feet away. It was not temporary, she said. Then she held out her hand. It was such a simple gesture that I almost laughed from the relief of it. I took her hand. Neither of us rushed the moment or pretended it solved everything. She still owned Willow Creek. I still had habits built from years of expecting loss. The age difference had not disappeared. Neither had the gossip waiting beyond the store walls. What happens now? I asked. Victoria glanced at the clock. The store closes in 40 minutes. And after that, we have dinner. Is that an order? Her smile became real. No, it is an invitation. Then yes. Months later, I repaired the store's old cooling unit as a paid contractor. Victoria questioned the invoice because she thought I had charged too little. I told her she was making decisions for both of us again. She told me I was avoiding a direct answer. We stood beside the open cooler arguing quietly until we both started laughing. That was how it worked between us. Not perfectly, not easily, but openly. For the first time, I stopped keeping every part of my life packed for departure. Not because I believed nothing could change, because I had finally found something worth choosing before it did.